This is her, in her Scivias, her first theological work, this is actually her self-portrait. So the first page in the introduction is a picture of her. That fire that's coming down on her is the living light or the Holy Spirit. And then you have her priest Volmar, who's kind of transcribing it for her. So Volmar was really a part of Hildegard's life for about 60 years. As I said, she lived to be 81. He died in 1173. She died in 1179. During those last 6.5 years of her life, she had 3 other scribes. So that just goes to show you, Volmar either knew how to handle her, or she just couldn't kind of get in a groove with somebody else. But Volmar was one of the Benedictine monks at Disibodenberg, which we'll see some pictures of in a second. And then even when Hildegard left Disibodenberg to build her own monastery, eventually, not immediately, but eventually, the bishops in Mainz gave permission for Volmar to accompany the sisters to Rupertsberg, and she ended up at Rupertsberg with her. She's called Hildegard of Bingen. This is the train station today. It looks very different from when Hildegard was there. But you have, I don't think I have a picture in the slides, and I apologize, but you have in Bingen, where the Nahe and the Rhine rivers intersect, you have, of course, you have on one side of the Rhine, you have Eibingen or Rudesheim, which is where her reliquary is at and the abbey is at today. On the other side, you have Bingen, and then across the Nahe River, you have Rupertsberg. So you really have all of these cities kind of together, if you will, on this one point. She really wasn't in Bingen at all. She was in Rupertsberg, which is across the Nahe River from Bingen. But she would cross into Bingen, of course, and then she would cross over the Rhine eventually to go to Eibingen when she built a second monastery. But she's called Hildegard of Bingen, but it's really Hildegard of Rupertsberg, I would think. But St. Rupert, I'll just say real quick, St. Rupert was a priest who was buried, a saint, on the mountain where she built Rupertsberg, just as Disiboden was buried at where Disibodenberg was at. So this is, if you get a chance ever to go and you get off, I know you're going on a cruise pretty soon, but if this is the train station, so if you actually take a train, say from the airport into Bingen, this is where you're going to get off. So, okay, we'll go to the next picture. So in 2015, I went to Germany for the first time by myself to do research, and first time I'd ever been out of the country. I was alone. I don't speak German, and so I had a very interesting trip. I met some very nice taxi drivers and some not so nice taxi drivers, but I ended up getting off a train I was looking for Hildegard's birthplace, so I was looking for Bermersheim. So I got off the train, I looked at my phone, it said it was 2 miles. I thought, well, I'll just walk, I'm not going to deal with a taxi. And this is what I came up on pretty quickly, and I had no idea what was in those woods. And at first I hesitated and thought maybe I shouldn't go in there. I don't know what the local animal life is like, bears, or all your imagination goes wild, wolves. And then I thought, no, I'm going to do it. And I loved that photo because I think it reminded me of what the spiritual journey is like. When we go searching for what it is God's calling us to, that's often what it looks like. And somebody mentioned being in dark places and not really knowing what's on the other side. Thank goodness it was just great vineyards and nobody shot me for being on their property. That was another thought that was in my mind, as if I'm on somebody's private property. But anyways, I just love that image. So I went in search of Hildegard's birthplace. You can go to the next one, Mary Teresa. I found Bermersheim. Eventually, I learned there were 2 Bermersheims. So eventually, by the end of the day, I got to the correct Bermersheim. This church here in Bermersheim, most books that you read will say she was born in Bermersheim. You could go to the next slide, Mary Teresa. This church claims to be her baptismal place. There's a statue of her outside. However, current scholarship is saying she probably was not born in Bermersheim. You can go to the next one. But she was actually born in Niederhosenbach. So I just put this out here because if you start reading, I don't want you to be confused or to say, well, she told us the wrong place. It's probably Niederhosenbach. But Hildegard came from a noble family, and her family owned property in both places. And so the archives are very hard to tell where she was actually born, Bermersheim or Niederhosenbach. As you can see, both places, and if you go to the next one, there's another church in Niederhosenbach that's also claiming to be her baptismal place. You can visit 2 places Hildegard was baptized. I did walk, we did walk on our pilgrimage to Niederhosenbach. we, as Julie said, I've been there 4 times. This summer was my 4th trip, but I went with an international Hildegard group. There's an institute in Germany called the Skivias Institute, and they organized this 85-mile pilgrimage, and it happened to be unseasonably warm that week, so it was really, we did some penance, I think, on top of everything else, but it was a beautiful trip. So that's her birthplace. You can go to the next one. When she was 8 years old, she was tithed to the Benedictine monastery at Disibodenberg. Hildegard was the 10th child, so, you know, in the scriptures, you give a 10th of your resources to God, so that was part of it, but also she demonstrated that she had spiritual gifts from a very early age, and so I'm sure her parents realized it would be kind of hard to marry her off on top of it. So as sometimes I'll do talks somewhere and people are just scandalized by the fact that she could have been tithed at the age of 8. Most likely she didn't actually go into the male monastery at the age of 8. She was tied to a woman named Jutta from Sponheim. And then from there, she probably stayed with Jutta and learned Latin, learned the scriptures, you know, got some basic education. And then she went into, probably with Jutta as anchorites, into the male monastery when she took her vows at 14 or 15. But that's debated hotly among scholars, but that's probably more like what happened, because a male monastery couldn't handle a child. So, but she was tied. Jutta took care of her. She was her spiritual mother. It was initially in the anchorage was supposed to be Jutta and Hildegard and one other girl. Does anybody here know what an anchorage is? No? Okay, so an anchorage would be built on a male monastery or any monastery. An anchorage would be just this little cell that would be built on it. And when it's like a cloistered life, but you never leave that cell. So a lot of times they would have a funeral service for the women when they went in there. And they would actually brick the door in. So once they went in, they literally never exited. They had 2 windows, normally one that overlooked the church so that they could participate in the hours and Mass, and one outside where they could receive food and probably pass out waste. I know it's disgusting, but pass out their waste. And then also pilgrims would come and seek their advice. For women in that era, sometimes being an anchorite was a step up from being in an arranged marriage, especially nobility, because, if you've ever watched the Borgias or any of those series, you know that women were used as political pawns. And so they were at least guaranteed a life free from marriage, and they would receive education and things like that. Hildegard was intended to be an anchorite, but you cannot keep a spirit like hers in a cell, so she never really made it to the anchorage. When Hildegard and Jutta and the other woman, when they began to form this community and word got out about them and their reputation spread, more and more women wanted to be a part of it. And so it really was a convent from an early age as opposed to an anchorage. But nonetheless, she was tied as an anchorite. This is a mosaic that's in the Abbey. I don't know if you remember seeing it when you were at the Abbey. Along the wall, they have Hildegard's life in a mosaic forms. That's her being tied to Disibodenberg. So I do want, you can go ahead to the next one, but I do want to say something about when you're tied, as you might imagine, it comes with dowries and property and things like that. And so for the male monks, it was to their benefit also to allow more women to come and not keep it just as an anchorite, because these were noble women that were coming with big dowries. And so the monastery of Disibodenberg became very big and wealthy based on these dowries, which became later, when Hildegard wanted to leave, became a big point of argument. So these are the ruins of Disibodenberg. They're in very nice shape. We're gonna, I won't say anything while we look through them, and then when we get to the last one, if you have any questions, or Jim or Mary Teresa, were there, if you have anything you want to say about it. But the ruins are in relatively nice shape. So most of the big pieces are the male monastery. This is the infirmary. There's also the male quarters you'll see, and you'll see pictures of the chapel, what's left. And then the last two pictures are of the women's quarters, which are very small, which is why Hildegard wanted to build her own place. And then Mary Teresa, you'll stop at the one that has just like overlooking the valley. Okay, so we'll just go through these in just a few seconds on each one, so you can can see they're in really nice shape. It's a very, very spiritual place.
What are those panels?
Those were sarcophagi covers or casket covers, and when they found, it's owned by a, I'll say this real quick, it's owned by a private investor right now, and I think when they purchased the property, over time they had shifted from the graves. And so they collected as many as they could. They put some on display in the ruins, and then they have a museum that they have some of the broken pieces in the museum. I think they were all over the place when they found it, you know, hundreds of years later. So they tried to save as much as they could. Where the original caskets were, I'm not sure if they know that, because they found the pieces all over the place. That is one of the walls in the women's cell. So that is a very magical place for me because I, you know, it's very likely Hildegard was physically in that space.
That's a little fireplace?
It's a window.
Oh.
Yeah, it's bricked in, and you know, over the years mud and things filled it up, but it's actually a window.
So when they were in the cell, was it contemplation, study, praying? Was there anything they had to do for the monks, or it was really set?
No, and this is from the women's cell as well, they intermixed with them. I would imagine because they did a lot of gardening, and she also worked in the infirmary, so a lot of Hildegard claims all of her knowledge came from the living light, and I would be willing to say that there were things that she knew that were not really the science of her day. She was ahead of her time, so I believe some of it was certainly from mystical experiences. But this monastery also had a huge infirmary. So I would assume she worked in the infirmary and learned a lot from the Benedictines there. And they probably helped cook and, right, I mean, I'm sure that would be an expectation.
Convent, but if she had been in Anchorage, then she
That
would
wouldn't
have
have
just been in the cell, right?
Right, exactly. So if she had been in Anchorage, she would not have even left there. Because like I said, they usually brick them in, so they couldn't leave to shower or anything like that.
So she didn't really live inside that cell.
No.
She was able to be outside.
Right, so, yeah, she was tied as an anchorite, but most scholars say she never probably lived even a day as an anchorite, more as just a cloistered nun. But like I said, she did clearly have access to the library, the infirmary, things like that, and probably gained a lot of her knowledge. She also, Disibodenberg was being built while she was there. So she watched it, like when she was tied there, it wasn't a completed monastery. So she watched, and it was being built in good part by the dowries that were coming in. You know, I'm sure her family helped to build it. And so she watched it, which probably gave her the confidence to say, I can build my own. You know, I watched them build this one, I know what to do. And so, yeah, and I would have, you know, they tended gardens and cooked and all of that stuff. And she's got a lot of, even her books on foods and things like that would presume that she had a lot of hands-on with cooking and things. Yes?
My mind keeps going back to the same question, so
So, yeah, please ask it. Yeah, ask it.
What was it that you had mentioned that, is it
Yuta, yes.
Yuta.
Well, you hear it pronounced, you hear it, Yuta.
Okay.
It's J-U-T-T-A of Sparheim.
Okay, so Yuta and Hildegard and a third woman.
And a third young girl, like Hildegard's age.
Okay, so they're together and something is attracting other women to come to join them. What was it?
Well, even as anchorites, they would put the word out that they had this holy woman because pilgrims would come, and that was one of the reasons they had the window to the public. Pilgrims would come and seek advice, or like a sage or any other holy person, and they would bring gifts to the monastery. So it would be to the benefit even of the Disibodenberg to get the word out that we have these holy women here, because it drew pilgrims. So for Hildegard, she was brought to Yuta because Yuta's reputation as being this holy, brilliant woman was already out there. Hildegard, however, exceeded Yuta in every aspect, but she learned from Yuta. Yuta was very rigid in terms of the Benedictine rules. So Yuda did a lot of self-flagellation. She wore a cilice. She died very young, in her 40s, most likely from an infection from the cilice. And she starved herself a lot. And so Hildegard had a much more moderate approach to the Benedictine rule, probably from watching Yuda die right in the next year. But that's how, they would get the word out that there were these holy women here. And it was meant, like I said, monasteries' livelihood depended on gifts and pilgrims and donations, like they do today.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
This is a piece of wall from the women's quarters as well, so that was pretty. And then this is the view that overlooks the Na Valley. So you just kind of imagine that Hildegard's got this theological concept of veritas. Now she didn't invent that word. Sometimes I read in books, people say, well, she invented the word. The word pre-existed her. It was in some ancient Roman literature, and Gregory the Great used it, and some other people. But she really reinvented its interpretation. So for her, it wasn't just the greenness outside. It was a holistic, whole body. You're verdant in mind, body, and spirit. And if any of those three pieces are out of balance, your whole system's going to be out of balance. So she gave it a much deeper interpretation, but she didn't invent it. She just gave it new life, if you will. But you can just see, like, living. One of the things we're going to hear in a little bit is that there are certain foods that she felt should be consumed daily, and chestnuts are one of them. For her, she makes a funny comment in Physica that anybody with an empty brain should eat chestnuts because it looks like a brain and it's good for brain health. But I figured chestnuts grew in that area. But last year I had the opportunity to go in September, and I had never been there in September, and I realized all the chestnuts were falling from the trees at Disibodenberg. So for her, she was just walking in chestnuts, and so she was so in tune with the world around her. She used what was there and made the most of it. So.